So this is a new additional format for the channel. I'm going to take a number of smaller topics and roll them into one long video. I've already uploaded these topics on Patreon over the last couple of weeks, so I'll include some of the feedback I got over there. I've been on a pretty good streak with YouTube lately in terms of monetization, but in general, a lot of my videos get hit with either copyright or profanity, and it tends to be the bigger ones, the alpha male one, the rose one. I mean, obviously, if I'm using that much content, I'm going to get hit by something. And I'm honestly okay with copyright. That's the game I'm playing here. But about a third of my videos tend to get hit with either copyright or caught in YouTube's profanity filter. So I'm going to start developing my Patreon, and this new format is how I'm going to do it. If you sign up over there, you get a couple early videos a month, and you can add your 2 cents when I upload them here. Outside that, the channel will remain exactly the same. There won't be any changes to my usual videos, and of course they'll go straight up to this channel like they always have.
My boots, my face, my daily face. It's the calendar page again. Take it slow, take it easy. Shed some light, shed some light. Take it slow, take it easy. Shed some light, shed some light.
15 minutes in the books. We head to the championship rounds.
One thing I want to discuss is one of the major talking points coming out of UFC 229 was at the end of round 3, McGregor said it's only business. And this was really surprising to me. It was one of the very few things Khabib and Conor fans largely agreed on. I'd say about 80% of the comments I've seen seem to agree with the idea that he said it's just business, or it's only business. Before I get into this topic, I want to explain where I'm coming from and why I'm even thinking about this. A few months ago, I began a video series. You've seen the first part of it, the Foundry of Champions. These videos were supposed to go up as one and be the first part of a 3-part series. The whole thing will probably be about 70 minutes when it's finished. The purpose of the series was to frame what became the biggest fight ever. I mean, we all know why the fight was so big. I don't need to explain that to anyone, but the purpose of the series was to illustrate exactly why it became so big, lay out the specifics of why Khabib became such a megastar following the fight. So part 1 is what you saw here: Dagestan, wrestling, history, culture, etc. Part 2 will continue on from that, but move on to discussing Khabib and McGregor, and some of the personality differences and some of the ideological differences between the two men, because obviously that was a huge part of what made the fight so big. And then part 3 will finally conclude with the build-up and the fight. In the build-up, there'll be major references to the previous 2 parts. So, on the surface, the Foundry of Champions looks like a kind of a brief history lesson with some cultural and political information. And on their own, they are interesting videos on the region, but the overall purpose of these videos was just to flesh out some of the buttons that McGregor will be pushing in part 3. That was the whole reason I made these videos. As I said, part 2 will discuss some of the ideological differences between the two men, and again, this will come up in part 3 when discussing the build-up. Everything in part 1 and what will be in part 2 is in there to make sure that part 3 is as resonant as possible. That's the whole purpose of part 1 and what will be part 2. And so, the reason the line, "it's only business," is so perfect for me and for part 3 is because there's not a single moment in the entire history of these two men that better represents the ideological line between them. McGregor saying it's just business, referring to the build-up, and moments later Khabib utterly rejecting that philosophy by jumping the cage and illustrating that no, for me it is not just business. It is such a perfect moment. I'm not saying I took any satisfaction in the idea that Conor might have said it, but as someone who likes to make my points in narratives, it is perfect. So if he said it, I would use it in part 3. It would be a major moment of that video. Unfortunately, I can't use it just because most people think he said it. Because ultimately, I don't think he said it. I think he said something totally different. Look, I was rooting for Khabib. I have huge use for the phrase, "it's only business." but I just don't think he said it. I have listened to the clip 50 times, and I cannot hear any one of those words. Not a single one. I can't hear it's, I can't hear just, and I can't hear business. I heard something totally different. My explanation is going to sound silly at first, but bear with me. At least hear me out. What I think Conor said is fine kisses. Fine kisses. And very simply, I think he's just mocking the clinch. He's trying to talk shit. He's saying fine kisses, as in we might as well be making out here for all the damage this clinch is doing. Who is this hurting? And that's so consistent with McGregor. He's just shit-talking. He's trying to mock Khabib. The original subtitle clip that came out said either it's just business or it's only business. So one word people seem to agree on is business. So I'm going to play that part on its own. Now, I can hear the last syllable and a half of business, but there's no B. There is no way anyone can convince me there's a B in there. And there is a clear K. So what I think is going on here is he's saying kisses, and people are hearing the last syllable and a half, isses, and mistaking it for isness. Isses, isness, they do sound alike. I'm not saying I'm right here, the audio is not very clear, but can you at least hear the K here? And I think the first word is fine. Fine kisses. Again, I'm not saying I'm right here, but I'll put it like this. If I was the person who subtitled the original clip, it's just business wouldn't have even entered my fucking head. Wouldn't have even registered. I would have subtitled it fine kisses. But even though that explanation does reflect much better on McGregor, I still think it was just a bad moment for him. You know, he's trying to talk shit, but it kind of falls flat compared to his usual stuff. You know what it reminds me of? You know, some days you're just on. Today is your fucking day. You leave the house, whatever life throws at you, you've got an answer. You're on fire. You make a joke, the whole room laughs. Today is just your fucking day. And then there's other days where you may as well not even drag your raggedy ass out of bed. Someone asks you a question, you're tripping over your words, you make a joke, and people look at you like, Jesus Christ, what the fuck was that? Was that supposed to be funny? And you realize, hey, today is just not my day. Today is not my fucking day. And I think that's basically what happened here. I mean, if you compare it to the Mendes fight, McGregor got his ass whooped in round 1. But there's a moment between rounds where he looks across the octagon and gleefully beckons Mendes on. It's an amazing moment. And that is a man who knows, despite round 1, hey, it is still my fucking day. It is still my motherfucking day. He still knows he's winning that fight. And McGregor's had many moments like that, where his trash talk and his charisma, it just works. But this moment, you know, he did his thing. He tried to talk his shit. It came out a little weak. And like a poorly timed joke, Khabib just turns around and is like, what the fuck are you even yapping about? Jesus.
The books, we head to the championship rounds.
And that's what the moment represents to me. I don't think McGregor was apologizing for the build-up, and I don't think it's a moment that represents the ideological line between the guys, but I do think it was an interesting moment where McGregor fell flat in a situation where he normally wouldn't. And Khabib is like, hey, Conor, today is not your day, buddy. And so I can hear fine kisses. Fine kisses is consistent with McGregor's personality, and it makes sense in the context of the fight. But I can't hear it's only business. It's not really consistent with McGregor's personality, and it never really made any sense to me. Like, what are people suggesting here? That in the midst of a fight, Conor basically begged for mercy and apologized for the build-up? As if Khabib is going to be like, oh, okay, I might as well take it easy on you now. Like, it just doesn't make any sense to me. Anyway, obviously, I might be wrong. I know most people disagree with me. But whatever about fine kisses, that's why I can't use it's only business. because I just don't believe he said it. As you'd expect, I got quite a lot of feedback on this subject, and I expect it'll be a controversial one here. James Tomlinson said, McGregor posted on Instagram in January saying, "The same thing I said to Khabib at the end of round 3. My round, don't be bitchin'." So McGregor claims he said don't be bitchin', and in the context, this makes more sense than any other explanation I've heard. Khabib is complaining to the ref, and McGregor says, hey, don't be bitchin'. It makes perfect sense. The issue is that it's impossible to hear even a single one of those syllables in the right place. And McGregor is probably the most unreliable source in this case. He's prone to hyperbole and huge self-aggrandizement. So I don't buy it. I think he just put out the most favorable explanation he could think of. Tobias said, I think Conor posted a statement on Instagram or Twitter sometime after the fight, stating he said, fighting business. But as Big T, that's a funny name, Big T. But as Big T pointed out here, that was an alpaca video. He thought Conor said fight business. And to be honest, fight business, fine kisses, we're in the same ballpark here. The only real difference is that I think there's a K. And by the way, I don't think I've solved it here. My point is not that it is fine kisses. It's more that I think it's not just business. I don't have any special qualification in hearing things, so you gotta take it for what it's worth. Shawnee C says it wasn't just a bad day like Mix Molly reckons. Now, I agree with that, I think the moment wasn't a bad metaphor for the entire build-up, actually. As Stefan said, I'm not the only guy that felt Conor couldn't find his rhythm throughout the entire build-up for this fight. And yeah, I agree. I think Conor really showed up for the very last press conference. He was outstanding. But outside that, I thought he was flat the whole time. Stefan continues, so much rides on his words that before I watched this video, I was bought into the line, it's only business. And this is so true because I think it absolutely represents McGregor's philosophy with regards to trash talk. I don't think it's personal for him. But in terms of something he would ever say apologetically in the middle of a fight, I don't think so. Here's another point. Either way, with each unkept promise, Conor's failure to deliver seems to distance him further and further from his own words. And that's a good point. Conor showed his persona as robust enough to handle a loss with Nate Diaz, and I suspect he'll do the same with Khabib. But how many losses can he handle? The guy really needs a fucking win here. And I'd love to see it, by the way. I'd love another couple years of just McGregor fucking magic. But that story came out the other day about him smashing some fan's phone, stomping on it, and then running away. So I don't know where the guy's head's at, but that's not a good sign. Another thing worth mentioning here is that one of the things I mentioned in this video was this stare down here. And I made the point that I felt it was a big moment. McGregor talked many times about being able to read opponents. And everything in the man's rise led me to believe that he is better than 100% of people I've ever seen at taking a measure of a person's mental state. McGregor almost seemed to be able to look right into his opponent's soul. It was just amazing to watch the guy work. And I mention this as an example of him finally looking at a guy and really not seeing any weakness. So it was amazing that there was almost a perfect replay of the moment in the octagon. The two men being separated, staring each other down, talking shit, with Khabib being the aggressor. Because this is exactly what I think Conor saw here. A guy who will not break.
My boots, my things, my things. It's the calendar page again. Take it slow, take it easy. Shit's loud, shit's loud. Take it slow, take it easy. Shit's loud, shit's loud.
So I'm watching UFC 235 and this commercial comes on. Dominic Cruz pulls up at the UFC headquarters, he almost runs into TJ Dillashaw, and they get into a bit of a back and forth.
What's up?
Yo, I was here first.
I was here first.
Hey, you rocking Toyo tires? I got Toyos as well.
So we both got Toyos. How do you want to handle this then?
And so what we got here was kind of a clever setup. We know all about the rivalry between them, all the animosity, and so it's like, how is this situation going to be resolved? Presumably there's gonna be some witty, biting trash talk between the two, and the commercial will end with a clever tagline about Toyo tires. Great. No, not great. What happens next is, in the background, Forrest Griffin rolls into the scene in a big SUV, drives over a bush, gets out of the car, and just screams.
Oh, yeah, baby. Still got it. Love my Toyo tires. Oh, yeah, baby. Still got it.
Still got what? Mental illness? Bipolar disorder? Like, what has Forrest still got here? What the fuck is this? It's like we have two different commercials. You know, we have the first half of one commercial, and then we have the end of... I mean, look, Forrest shows up, okay? He's driving erratically. He's screaming for no reason. He's clearly on drugs. Probably been up all night snorting coke. It's like a scene out of The fucking Hangover or something. So, like, the first part of the commercial, the conflict is not resolved. I mean, is this little spat just out the fucking window now? What was the point of this? And the second half, it just kind of begs more questions than it answers. I mean, what's wrong with Forrest here? His brain appears to be malfunctioning in a major fucking fashion. Like, I wouldn't mind seeing a full Michael Douglas, man falling down style movie that brought us to this point, where Forrest is ignoring the rules of the road, driving like a maniac, screaming in broad daylight, and just flipping out all over the fucking place like a lunatic. There's a story there. Let's flesh out his descent into madness. Don't just show the fucking madness.
Oh, yeah, baby. Still got it.
The ad just makes no sense, and there's a missed opportunity for some witty dialogue between these two. I mean, we'd all love to see that. These guys' rivalry was great, but this shit just makes no sense. And you gotta think, there's a whole marketing team behind this. So they were having meetings and brainstorming sessions, throwing ideas around. They got all the big brains involved. And this is what they came up with. This was the best idea. You know, I'd love to see some of the shit that got rejected. The obvious way to resolve this situation is in the dialogue. We'd all love to see that. But they're like, no. We need to go big. How about we have a monkey run on set and bite Dominic Cruz on the balls? Maybe we could drop a piano on TJ Dillashaw. We could have Forrest Griffin just screaming for no reason, basically having a meltdown, and flipping out all over the fucking place about Toyo tires. Just, I don't get it. You know, this is not Dominic Cruz's first offense, by the way. He's a multiple-time offender. So here's a Metro PCS commercial. Guy sitting on his couch watching the UFC. His wife comes in and says, "Hey, have you cleaned the rug?" And he looks at her all coy like, "Yeah, I did clean the rug." Wink, wink. So here you have a tired, cliche setup. Archetype of a nagging wife and a lazy husband. But it's a relatable situation. You know, we get the premise. The situation makes sense. But then he goes out the backyard, and all of a sudden, out of nowhere, Daniel Cormier and Dominic Cruz, in full fight gear, are helping him with the fucking housework. Now, what the hell is going on here? Where in the fuck did these guys come out of? And of all the inane shit you could have these guys doing, helping with the housework? I mean, nobody wants to see Daniel Cormier in an apron baking a cake like Miss Doubtfire. Dominic Cruz flapping about the place with a feather duster, getting in all them hard-to-reach corners. Nobody wants to see that shit. You know, Dominic Cruz is like the Samuel L. Jackson of MMA commercials. Like, he'll do anything. You wave a script in front of his face, and it's like, show me the money. Show me the fucking money. Whereas Dillashaw's kind of like the last 10 years of Robert De Niro. You know, he'll do some shit, but he's been in at least one great production, and it's this one with Wonderboy Thompson. It's set in an office. Stephen Thompson and Dillashaw are sharing a desk. And next thing, Wonderboy takes a slurp out of his cola, but it makes that obnoxious sound. My God, you know, we've all been here. We've all had a coworker who does something that just makes you want to beat him to death with a stapler. I used to work with a guy, and he used to sniff all fucking day. It's like, oh, for fuck's sake. This guy's been sniffling for at least 6 months. Like, go see a doctor. This is a medical matter here. And so Dillashaw looks at Wonderboy like he's gonna shove the cola right up his fucking ass. A fight breaks out, and it basically represents what we'd like to do to that annoying-ass coworker we have. By the way, the commercial is for suits. Suits with flexible material. That's the unique selling point. They're flexible. So these guys are doing all sorts of moves. Wonderboy throws a beautiful kick. There's slow motion. The lighting is great. The moves are great. The whole thing is well put together. And critically, it highlights the product. I mean, the clothes look super slick. The whole thing is just a fun commercial. So here we have a product that makes sense, but the commercial makes no sense. Again, with Metro PCS, product that makes sense, commercial makes no fucking sense. And here, finally, we have a commercial that makes sense, but the product itself just makes no fucking sense. Who needs a flexible fucking suit? James Bond? Agent Smith? I've never been in an interview where they said, okay, great CV, you got all the credentials, we think you'd really fit in here. Oh, one more thing. Can you do the splits? Let's see some fucking gymnastics here. You know, I just don't get it. Just an unnecessary feature for a suit. But the suits themselves, they do look slick, so it's still a great commercial. Stefan says here, Jesus, I can only imagine Farah's appearance is meant to trigger some type of relevancy response for middle-aged 40-something MMA fans like myself. Like, oh, Farah still has it, maybe I do too. Now I'm gonna run out and buy some Toyo tires for my Titan. Yeah, probably. I mean, I think you're giving him too much credit by suggesting there was any actual thought put into this piece of shit, but maybe. But the best commercial I saw recently was the Modelo one with Stipe. What the brand tried to do is, they obviously sat down with Stipe, they learned all about his backstory, they tried to identify the man's values, and they try to tie those values to their own brand. Now, tying a brand to an individual's values is always going to be a bit of a stretch.
Modelo and myself, we have the same mentality, just that fighting spirit. I think the partnership with Modelo is a natural fit. I mean, they're one of the fastest growing beers. And, I'm the heavyweight champion, one of the fastest growing sports.
But it's a great ad, stylishly shot, good music, well narrated, and I think Stipe was a good choice for Modelo. And that brings me to my next topic, which is selling Stipe.
UFC heavyweight Stipe Miocic fights for more than just a gold belt. A proud son of immigrants, Stipe fought for his dreams while working 2 jobs and fighting fires for his community. Stipe still fights fires and still proudly fights for his heritage.
In the lead up to the Ngannou fight, there was some controversy about the promotion. Stipe felt the build-up heavily favored Ngannou, and they wanted Francis to win, which was probably true. But I can understand where the UFC were coming from. I had a similar issue with Stipe. I wanted to make a Stipe video a couple years ago, and I thought it was going to be an easy one. You know, the guy is heavyweight champion and has kept his job as a firefighter. He's an American hero. But I ran into problems because I couldn't find the necessary quotes or sound bites to interpret the firefighter angle and the details of his life in a remotely deeper, credible manner. Stipe is a bit of a man's man. You know, he's a closed book. He doesn't go into what makes him tick in any great detail. And he's a little bit nervous in front of cameras, or at least he seems that way. So I searched for these sound bites that would allow me to make the video, but I couldn't find them. I want to show you what I mean here. Here's an example of something I could put in a video. Stipe Miocic is an American hero. He's a clean-cut heavyweight champion, but not only is he a great athlete and a role model, but he felt so compelled to give back to his community that he kept his job saving lives as a firefighter. Now, on the surface, that looks like a pretty reasonable statement. But I can only really say the first part. The last part, that's me interpreting the details of his life. Because here's another reasonable way I could have ended that statement. Stipe began working as a firefighter and found such a brotherhood that despite winning a heavyweight championship of the world, he hasn't left his job or his team. Now, that also sounds pretty reasonable, and both of those things are very likely true to different extents. But from my perspective, depending on which one Stipe emphasizes, I'm talking about 2 very different videos with very different themes. One is basically about virtue, about a man who feels an unusual need to give back to his community. I mean, there are very few people on earth who juggle a career as a high-level professional athlete with a job as a fucking firefighter. The other video would be about the supportive nature of the close bonds formed in a brotherhood of men who are prepared to risk their lives for each other and others in highly stressful situations. Now, both of those videos could be good, and you could get both of them out of Stipe, but not without the necessary sound bites. Without them, there's a hollowness to the whole thing. Someone could easily come along and say, hey, maybe Stipe kept his job as a firefighter because, he just doesn't like the idea of a cat stuck up a fucking tree. And I can't validate that my statements hold an ounce more weight than theirs. And so, eventually, my video went from a Stipe video to a Stipe versus Junior Dos Santos video. And in the end, it was just a Junior Dos Santos video. And that's very likely what the UFC went through. They probably started out with the intention of hyping both guys. But it was just easier to hype Ngannou because of the incredible aura of invincibility he was carrying into the fight. Ngannou virtually hyped himself. So I can understand how the promotion became lopsided. Also, part of the issue might just be a nerves thing. Stipe is often kind of playing table tennis in his interviews. The best example is probably parts of his Rogan podcast. That's 2 hours, so you would expect that to at times get deep. But it almost entirely stays on the surface of subjects. When Rogan asks him a question, you can tell he's not really thinking too deeply about the answer. He's more concerned about returning serve. Getting a ball back in the Rogan side of the court. Because that's where Stipe is more comfortable, when he's not talking.
But you have an overall athletic background, too. Like, you played baseball.
Yeah, I tried. Yeah, I tried, but I definitely wrestle. The wrestling does help me out. MMA because
sure,
I always use that. And I think baseball definitely helps me out too, just because of the reaction and the way I use my hips and stuff like that. It definitely helps me with mixed martial arts.
Yeah. Now you're a full-time firefighter too.
I'm part-time actually at 2 departments. But,
okay.
But it's just tough because being full-time. I didn't get hired full-time, so I couldn't. It'd be tough to do both. If I did before, it'd be a lot easier, but I can't just take a test because you have to do probation year long, and then you can't fight
now
12-hour shifts.
How much does that get in the way of your training?
Never.
Nope. No. How's that work?
Just the way I pick my schedule. If I had to I could trade someone or someone's coming in, I make it work. And they're amazing people. Like both stations are amazing. The Chiefs are great. The guys that work, actually a lot of them are coming to the fight January 20th. So.
And I'm sure most of you can relate to this. I certainly can. In some uncomfortable situations, I've played this type of verbal ping pong, where I'm a little uncomfortable and give kind of superficial responses. If you can relate to that, then you can definitely see it in Stipe. He also keeps things very lighthearted. He either makes a joke or laughs questions off.
So what's it like walking around the UFC Heavyweight Champion of the world? How's that feel?
Feels good. It doesn't really matter in my household. I'm like 4th on the ladder. It's my wife, then the 2 dogs, and then me. I'm there just to pay bills.
He doesn't really want to get into what makes him tick, and, that's fine. He may be embarrassed to talk about the details of his life in a kind of a profound or a self-aggrandizing manner. He may just not want to commodify his personal life. That's all very understandable. But I think it's part of the larger issue with trying to hype a guy like Stipe. I mentioned in the Fury video that most athletes, and especially champions, they almost embody a life full of purpose. And they usually have a lot to say about it. I think that's what makes them so resonant and relatable. We all have parts of our lives that represent struggle and single-mindedness, and these are often the most purpose-filled and meaningful parts of our lives. In my view, this is a massive part of what fighters represent: purpose. Even Fury, when reflecting on his depression, did so in an intense and profound way. But Stipe, he doesn't really have anything he really wants to get out there. And I honestly think it's because he's unusually down to earth. Despite chasing monumental goals and breaking records, he doesn't romanticize the details of his life. There's no self-aggrandizement with the guy. So yeah, I can totally understand the issue Stipe presented the UFC, a very difficult fighter to hype. Amazing highlight reel, but never quite had an aura of invincibility. Has a lighthearted personality and doesn't talk shit. Doesn't feel comfortable going in depth about the details of his life. And doesn't really embody a life full of purpose in the same intense way many other champions do. He himself doesn't really sell the significance of all the things that make him remarkable. And that makes it very difficult for anyone else to sell those things. I've tried. I'm not convinced he even thinks he's anything special. One of the firefighters who works with him said he was in cleaning toilets 2 days after winning the heavyweight championship of the world in Brazil. The guy probably came straight from the airport, dropped the belt, and whipped out the fucking plunger. It's unbelievable. You know, he totally represents the hard-working, blue-collar immigrant mentality. But I just think Stipe represents a cluster of characteristics that are very hard to hype. You know, people complain about a sport that has become chock full of narcissism and big egos, but as ridiculous as it sounds, I don't think Stipe had a big enough ego for his own good. You know, outside of impressive highlights and despite breaking records and being a pretty remarkable individual, I still don't think there was any selling Stipe until he was prepared to start selling himself.
Well, you know, it's an interesting thing, too, because what we're seeing today with MMA, we're seeing this combination, like this marriage of fighting with promotion.
I can't do it.
Yeah, you're not that guy.
I hate it.
Shawnee C says, this reminds me a bit of your video about DC getting all the hate. One of the points that I left out of that video, actually, was I think part of the reason DC is so quick to double and triple and quadruple down on his trash talk with a guy like Jones, despite all the negative feedback from the fans, is that if you think about Cormier, you know, he's so good at talking that he literally gets paid to talk. That's how good he is. You know, he did the Fox show, he does commentary, and he's one of the better received commentators. You know, people really enjoy him. So he's probably thinking, I'm so good at talking, they pay me to talk. Trash talking is just talking. Therefore, I must be good at trash talking. I must be fucking amazing at it. But there's a mistake, you know. Trash talking is not just talking. It's a different fucking animal. And if they book Jones Cormier 3, I wouldn't be surprised if he loses at trash talk again, even despite everything that's happened, because trash talking just does not suit Daniel Cormier. Sean continues, it's not just MMA. All sports need personalities to drive interest. Fury is a perfect example of that. Someone needs to tell Stipe to get caught banging a maid or something. It'll help him get a title shot. Yeah, the UFC would probably stick it in a fucking promo. And it's better than nothing. You know, as Stefan says here, there's not much more to the man than what you described. He's your typical husband, a great fighter, and a guy that probably gets as much, if not more, adrenaline from a dispatch than he does walking towards the octagon. And yeah, you know, that pretty much sums it up.